Okay, so we're looking at some of the cultural consequences of connectivity. And with all this amount of exchange going along all these massive networks of exchange, you're going to have a lot of cultural consequences. So let's look at some of them. But some quick takeaways is that these trade routes are not just for selling stuff. You're always trading culture. And that's maybe even more important than the things that you're selling, because that produces a change in society. As more people from different places run into each other, they share from their culture. So the big takeaway, religions are spreading. Islam, especially in Africa and throughout Asia, Southeast Asia, also all the way to Southeast Asia. So you're going from West Africa all the way to Southeast Asia and everything in between. Hinduism and Buddhism are also spreading. Technology, mostly Chinese technologies, are spreading and making their way to the West. They're going to be refined and updated and changed a little bit by Dar al-Islam, and then they're going to reach Europe, and they're going to have big impact on Europe, especially with the age of exploration, which is coming up shortly. Some of the people to remember, you have Batuta, who is Islamic. Marco Polo is from Italy. And then you also have Marjorie Kemp, who's very important. She's a religious pilgrim, and she has some very interesting writings. So culture is spreading, it's around, it alters from its original form. So Islam in Mecca is very different than Islam in Timbuktu. So you keep that culture, you can have the religion, but it stays within the setting and it changes a little bit, it adapts. And that happens especially with most religions. Same is happening with Buddhism. It's different in Japan versus it than what it is in Central India. And this is called syncretism, when you basically take aspects of a culture and you go on and they change. The three travelers are talked about here. You have Kemp, Marco Polo, and Batuta. And you can look at their travels. We've talked about them previously in class and seen other instances. And Batuta is the one who probably does the most. He goes all over the place. He is quite interesting. Okay, let's just go ahead and look at some of the basic things that we need to know and wrap this section up. So the key question we want to ask is, what are some of the intellectual and cultural effects of the trade? So we're looking for the cause is going to be trade networks, and then what are the effects? Well, religion is spreading. And again, Islam is the big one that's spreading, but Buddhism is also spreading quite a bit into East Asia. And Islam is spreading into West Africa, East Africa, into India, South Asia, and into Southeast Asia, all the way to Indonesia. Syncretization means basically when you fuse something new with something that pre-exists. So Buddhism combines with Taoism and it makes Zen Buddhism. That's a syncretization. Neo-Confucianism is something being syncretized. So it's basically the rational thought of Confucianism with Taoist and Buddhist mystical ideas, and that makes the Neo-Confucianism. And it tends to spread in Korea and Japan. The Muslim faith looks different in Spain, for example, than it does in Asia and than it does in Indonesia. East Africa becomes largely Muslim, and Swahili is another change that comes to this. This is a mixing of Bantu, the local language, with Arabic, and it makes Swahili. So all these syncretizations are the effects of ideas coming into area which have a different cultural background, and it's a different playing field. It's like if you take one chemical and you add it to another chemical, and then you add it to similar chemicals as the base, and you add this same chemical, it's going to be have a lot of sameness, but it's going to have some unique aspects that are aligned to that other chemical. So we have one aspect is science that greatly improves. And this is again because of the knowledge and the spread of knowledge, Chinese ideas mixing with innovations by Muslims, and Cairo is going to become a huge medical center. Baghdad is going to become the house of learning. Shipbuilding is greatly improved in all these ports. The Lane sail gives flexibility. Stern post rudders allow for more maneuverability. Astrolabes compasses are improved cartography, and this is going to soon be adopted by the European state, at first mostly Portugal and Spain, and it's going to give them a head start of the Europeans in getting out into the water. Urbanization starts coming as people learn more engineering, as population centers grow because of trade and because of the draw of trade and the possibility to make money. You start having cities that get very large, over 500,000 people, some even close maybe to 1 million people. This leads to more specialization and a bigger labor force. So the arts become specialized, the literature becomes specialized, learning becomes capsulated so it can really focus on one area. The two big voices that come out of this are Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta. So Polo, he travels from Italy and he goes to the court of Kublai Khan in China, and he kind of has to stay there. You know, he's an ambassador, but there are some questions of how free he was to leave. He tells a lot about Europe to Kublai Khan, and in turn, his writings inspire people in Europe to want to change their life, because things are not nearly as advanced in Europe as they are in other parts, especially in China and other parts of the world that have this rich trade. So they become very popular in Europe, and basically it awakens the desire to be like these places, which is going to make people to want to have a direct route to the trade route, which is going to start that exploration of Europe, looking for trade routes to China. That's going to have them go west and head toward the Americas. Battuta was a Muslim scholar. He's an expert in Muslim law, and he wants to kind of find out how is Islam faring? You know, what's going on in Islam, the concerns of the Mongol invasion, and then the persecution or the suffering that came on Islam as the Abbasid Caliphate is kind of getting wiped away and being replaced by some of the Turkish empires. He's looking at change, and he just wants to get a fix on what is Islam like where you live. And he compiles his writings, and his writings are a really good kind of like a synopsis of everything. So again, let's go back to our purpose here, our key takeaway, our essential question: what are the intellectual and cultural effects of trade networks? And that's exactly Battuta is trying to find out, how is this working out? How is Islam different in East Africa than it is in West Africa? How is it different in Indonesia? And he's really getting the idea of this cultural exchange with Islam being added into various cultures, and what kind of creation is it making? So basically, to wrap this up, you have increased cross-cultural interactions. This is resulting in the spread of literary, artistic, and cultural traditions, as well as scientific innovations and breakthroughs. One that you would want to keep an eye on over the next couple of units when we start talking about land-based empires and sea-based empires are some of the technologies. Particularly gunpowder is a big one, and the improvements that have happened to the navigation that we've mentioned several times: the sails, the rudders, the astrolabes, compasses, charting, etc. The fate of the cities varies greatly. Some of them are going to go through boom bust, because as one area goes up in trade, a lesser port that maybe was established may go down. So trade is directly tied to the success of these cities. And increased urbanization is making the population grow. It's also creating specialized labor forces. It's also creating maybe sometimes a large amount of people at the bottom end of the economic scale who may not be able to have enough jobs. But overall, you're having rising productivity and expanding trade as a result of this, as there's more productivity in the cities. And you have more of that cultural change, and the idea of people having more opportunities. That old saying we go back to that I talked very early in the year, city air breathes more free, is oftentimes proving itself. Finally, as exchange networks intensified, people are starting to record what they're learning in their travels. And the two big ones are Battuta and Marco Polo. And they are Batuta is more making chronicles of what is happening in Islam, and he wants to find out what's going on. And his writings give us such a great insight into this time period. Marco Polo's biggest impact is when his books tell about his travels in the East and his time in the East. People in Europe want to get closely connected and more involvement with the trade and the riches and the learning of the East. So that's what you have for these cultural consequences. And we will continue with Unit 2. We're almost wrapped up and hope to see you next time.